If you encounter a mugger in the street, a burglar, and he will just point a gun at you and give me your purse or you'll die. You give him the purse voluntarily. You actually do it because you don't want to die. So is that a gift and not a robbery? So if that's the case, there is no basically robbery is impossible.
Lugano's Plan B podcast presents Liberty and Bitcoin, exploring self-ownership, freedom, and decentralization with Giacomo Zucco.
I'm a Twitter troll. No, it's X-troll. I am also the director of the Plan B Network, which is an educational initiative started off from Lugano Plan B and now expanding everywhere. I think I may have participated to something like 20 Bitcoin startups since 2013 as a co-founder, investor, advisor, different roles.
How did being a libertarian shape you to become a Bitcoiner?
In two reasons, I think, in two ways. The first way is that Bitcoin is the first libertarian tool and strategy that actually works. Usually libertarianism was a nice theoretical concept because it's consistent and it also feels right because I think it is right. But then if you follow it in a world which is not libertarian, is based on collectivism and statism, usually you lose. You lose money, job opportunity, social relevance. With Bitcoin is the first time libertarianism and Austrian school principles and cypherpunk principles, they actually work and they win. So I think that Bitcoin is a tool for libertarianism, which libertarianism never had before. And it's also a way to libertarianism pill other people because they may start with Bitcoin and end up with freedom. And the second way is that I think that the concept we're going to discuss now later, the property rights, has some kind of deep philosophical connection with Bitcoin. We may discuss property rights in terms of first appropriation of resources, homesteading, which is very close to the concept of proof of work, and the contract theory, which is very close to smart contracts and transactions. So I like to see Bitcoin as some kind of practical instantiation of these abstract principles.
Is Bitcoin the virtualization of libertarianism?
In a way, Bitcoin is not even virtual. It is the de-virtualization of money. If you think about that, fiat money is virtual in different sense. It's digital, but also it doesn't have any collateral, so it's based on nothing. Bitcoin is rebasing money on physical proof of work. So if you go from the gold nuggets, which is an object that you can hold yourself and pass to somebody else physically, then you go to the gold coin, which is a sort of virtualization because now instead of weighting the gold, you check the number on the coin. Then you go to the banknote, which is still physical, it's a physical token, but there's no gold there, it's just representing the debt denominated in gold. Then you go to the banknotes with fractional reserve and with zero reserve in the 70s, and then you go to the digital fiat money, which is basically digital representation of nothing. Bitcoin is close to a gold nuggets. It can be verified independently without trusting a signature or an image. You can verify with your node, and I can give it from myself to you as a bearer instrument. So Bitcoin is the de-virtualization of money, and as such is also in a way de-virtualizing the idea of property right into something practical.
How do you think the libertarian movement reflects into Bitcoin's design and use?
Yeah, self-ownership is fundamental because it's the reason you can use logically to explain property rights in general. And in Bitcoin specifically, we start from the point of view that everybody can decide individually what they do with their nodes and their rules. That you can even change the rules of Bitcoin yourself. But the reason you don't do is that because you want to follow consensus in order to be able to talk with other people, to interact with other people. So if you need an objective way to measure value, then you will eventually fall down into the rabbit hole of digital scarcity and the rules of Bitcoin. And as somebody said, there is no second best. And so there's like this gravitational power that will attract you toward one single convention, which is a natural convention in a way. It was discovered more than invented, as Jack Mallers said. But if you try to do that, you will see that it's also something that is true for it's basically the practical version of this kind of very general concept. For example, I mentioned it before, proof of work is the idea that the first owner of some Satoshis, of a UTXO, of a Coinbase specifically, is the person that mixed his work with the protocol, a proof of work, which is almost exactly the words of John Locke about property rights at the beginning of the libertarian tradition. So John Locke said that when you arrive in a place which is not unappropriated, it's res nullius, it's stuff of nobody. And when you mix your work with the stuff, so if you start to, for example, if you grow a tree of apple, now you own the apple, you know the product of your work. If you start to build a bridge, now you own the passage rights on the bridge. So when you mix your labor with nature, you turn nature into your stuff. And then you can alienate that stuff from yourself by a contract. You can say, expressing your language, you can say, I have my right on this because I appropriated it first, but now I can give this right to you, and I will not claim it. I promise not to claim this right anymore, and I give you this right as a transaction, which is basically some conventional way, expressed in language, to alienate this right from myself. Bitcoin is the same. You extract property from nothing with your proof of work, and now you have to write something which you have to broadcast or keep private in the case of Lightning, which will eventually alienate your rights from yourself to somebody else. So you can see it's basically, we may think about that as a funny coincidence for this kind of mental masturbation, but I think there may be something there, because Satoshi had to, even unconsciously, he had to go through the concept of property in order to create a digital cash and digital gold. He had to follow the logical train of thoughts of property rights.
How does Bitcoin embody financial sovereignty and freedom from state control?
Yeah, so as we discussed before about the gold nuggets, at the beginning, when you have physical bearer tokens, you can still be being aggressed and you can be robbed, but it's kind of trustless in the sense that if I give you a physical object, now it's physical. You control it physically. You can hide it, you can take it, you can bring it away, you can protect it better. But this doesn't scale because I have to give somebody physical objects, which is bad for to transfer through space. Because it doesn't scale very well. Then we move to titles and rights in an abstract way. Like I write on a paper that this is now owned by you, but this is very fragile because in this case, if we have different claims, nobody's right, and the person which the party was stronger or connected with a stronger political entity will just make their claim prevail over the other. So we made property rights a little bit fragile when we create this kind of information-based property rights. Bitcoin goes back to the bare instrument, so as I said before, it's not virtual anymore, it's more physical, but in a way it's still digital, so very easy to transmit, and in a way, as you said, it makes it even more, it makes property rights easier to enforce and harder to violate. Why? Because it's based on the cypherpunk theory or crypto-anarchist theory. The theory is that using internet and strong cryptography, nobody knows who you are and where you are. And if I don't know who you are and where you are, I cannot hurt you physically. I can only convince you with words, or maybe I can just insult you and you can insult me back. The physical strength in the cyberspace with names doesn't matter. You can be super strong with a lot of weapons, with the government next to you, but still you cannot hurt other people except their feeling maybe. That's the only thing you can. You can just make people cry. That's it, and they can make you cry back if they respond. So physical strength is not important anymore. The speech becomes very important. Bitcoin is the realization of that principle. Maybe not everybody uses Bitcoin in a very cypherpunk way. But if you think about that, the core of Bitcoin is the cypherpunk principle of privacy. Because, one, you have to keep your key secret. Otherwise, other people will move Bitcoin for you. So the very core is privacy, is secrecy. Keep your private key secret. Then, in order, people can still come to you and use violence against you to convince you to give away the private key. So the second thing you can do is keep your fiat identity, your public identity, separated from your Bitcoin identity. You don't associate your name with your Bitcoin addresses. That's why KYC should be avoided, and identify your person with your private Bitcoin addresses is a very dangerous thing. You can do it if you want. Sometimes it's convenient, but it will reduce confiscate resistance of Bitcoin, because now I know that you have those Bitcoin. I don't know your private key, but I can just aggress you physically until you tell me. And then the third and harder and more complex step in Bitcoin is to disconnect the public key among them with CoinJoin and Lightning and other kind of techniques, so that one leak of your identity on one address will not also leak your identity on all the other addresses. So Bitcoin is unconfiscatable, as Tom Weiss would say, but it just means that it's very hard and expensive to confiscate at scale if you use it right. Of course, if you publish your private key on Facebook, it's pretty confiscatable.
Does Bitcoin's decentralized nature challenge libertarian mutual respect since it operates without mutual consent?
A lot of unpack there. So, first of all, argumentation ethics by Hoppe tells you that the only logically consistent framework of property rights is basically the libertarian Lockean Rothbardian one. So, homesteading and voluntary conflicts. So, it's just telling you that if you assume there is an objective right system, then in order to make it not contradictory with the fact that you are debating, so the fact, if we debate honestly about the resolution of a conflict over some kind of scarce property, scarce resource, so some good, economic good, if we assume there is a resolution, then we are already saying that it will not be the will, it will not be that might makes right. It's not just the stronger wins, the law of the jungle, because if that was the case, we will not argue. If you are stronger than me, you just take it, and if I'm stronger, I just take it. If we sit down and argue, we are already saying, we think that even if I can take it or you can take it, maybe you shouldn't and I shouldn't, because there is an objective right. If you assume that and you try to develop that through that train of thought consistently, you end up, that's Hoppe's argument, and I think it's convincing, you end up with libertarianism. And you cannot end up with Nazism or communism, because in that case you violate the basically you have performative contradiction. Your final model of property is assuming that the guy or the gal you're talking to cannot own their own body and their own mouth to discuss, or their own brain. So basically you are assuming that the initial idea under the conversation doesn't happen. This doesn't mean that somebody cannot say that Nazism or communism are right. They can say it. You may just let them speak, but they cannot say that consistently. I can say whatever I want, but I cannot make it consistent. I will be contradictory. I can be contradictory, but I cannot be consistently contradictory. If I contradict myself, I can, but my argument is not valid from a logical point of view. So on the internet and with Bitcoin, you can do whatever you want. You can be whatever you can claim whatever you want. Nobody can use violence to stop you if you are hidden behind this kind of cyberpunk ideal. You can claim whatever you want, but you are not immune from contradiction and from laws of logic. You can say something. I can say, I am lying, but that's contradiction, or that's logically recursive. So with Bitcoin, basically, we have the same problem, the same feature. Everybody can do whatever they want. As we said, you can run your version of Bitcoin where there are 23 million instead of 21 of units. When the signatures are not valid anymore, you can spend Satoshi's money. You can do that on your computer. But the fact that you do that will bring you outside of the common, shared, logical, natural convergence over a shared reality. So everybody can run the Bitcoin they want, but if they want to be connected with the other, they have to go down to the shared version, which is the consensus, the most work chain with the proper digital signature and so on. Same stuff is for property rights. Everybody can claim the property theory they want, but there's only just one which is logically consistent. And that's not a matter of opinion. You can Leibniz used to say that to solve ethical problems, if you start from logical stuff, you can write down the problem and the conflict, and you can calculate who is right. Of course, from the theory to practice, you have to know, for example, the two bases of property rights are homesteading, but that means that You have to be sure that the person that appropriated some resources was not actually the second. So you have to investigate reality, which can be very complex. You can have a clash of claims over some property. I was here first. No, I was here first. And then also you have contracts, which are very complex because they involve language. So you can have there are a lot of edge cases. Imagine, for example, implicit contracts. You enter a coffee in Lugano. You buy a coffee, and then the guy said, "Oh, by the way, my contract was that now you owe me 3 million francs." Why? In Lugano, that's almost realistic for a coffee because they're very expensive. But maybe 3 million francs are too much. And now, if you don't pay, I take your house. You are assuming by entering a cafe that the coffee will not be worth 3 million francs, even if we're getting closer. And so there are a lot of like implicit contracts, which is very, very complex. But the basis of it is that you can say whatever you want. But if you also want to be logically consistent, you unfortunately have to be libertarian. Otherwise, you just have to require logical contradiction.
Could we say we live in a world of implicit contracts?
There are a lot of implicit contracts. The idea that, in a way, libertarians are debunking some implicit contracts, because you could actually abuse the idea of implicit contracts. Like, if you don't move from here, you accept taxation. Like in Italy, taxation is like 70% almost of the total tax rate. If you live there and you don't leave, as I did, you are accepting that. But that's something that people could extend illogically. For example, if you live in Sicily and you don't pay the racket protection money to Cosa Nostra, then you are basically voluntarily paying that. That's a gift. But that's not right, because your property is there and somebody's coming to you and saying it's implicit that you accept my violence unless you do something else. That's not right. But to some degree, yeah, the idea that so the theory of social contract. I don't know, you are a woman in Saudi Arabia, and you just accepted the social contract that if you do something, if you read a book or go to school, we can just throw stones at you. I mean, that's not very fair. But on the other side, to assume that every contract must be always explicit, it also a little bit sketchy. Because, for example, we assume that, again, the coffee will not be worth your house. So there is some level of implicit contracts, and there are many of those. There are contexts. The fact that contracts must be expressed in language is also assuming that we have a shared language, which is a very strong assumption. Maybe there is one sentence that in one language means something and in the other means something else, and then I join a contract with that sentence that was basically misguided. So it's not perfection. It's not shallow. There's still a lot of investigate and part litigate, negotiate, but at least we have a strong logical foundation instead of pure relativism, which eventually ends up to be the law of the jungle again, like which the might makes right.
Does Bitcoin's open source model prove these ideas and challenge copyright as ownership of non-scarce goods?
Well, I have to say that I agree with Kinsella about the general theory, and with actually probably with Rothbard and other traditional libertarian thinkers, not all of them, but for sure with Hoppe and Kinsella about property rights. The idea of property rights or copyrights, patents, is an idea which is illogical, because it's the idea that you can own something which is not scarce. If I know a very funny joke and I tell you the joke, I'm not giving you something. I'm basically doing something on reality that will change your brain. Now your synapses will remember something. Now, if you are owner of your brain, you didn't sign. So, for example, Kinsella is not against NDAs. NDAs are different. It's like you pledge to acquire information in exchange with the promise not to reveal it. That's different. Or an industrial secret is also different. I'm not giving you my secret sauce for Coke or whatever. I'm not giving you my private key. That's a secret. That's different. But if I give you the private key and you didn't sign any kind of agreement not to divulge, to basically broadcast it, and you do, it's like I go around the town whistling a very nice song. Somebody hears it. He didn't sign any contract with me, and there is no implicit contract that they cannot whistle it again to somebody else. So property rights is an artificial intellectual property is an artificial property rights system which is completely arbitrary. It's based on governments. You cannot have natural property rights in ideas because ideas are not scarce. So I agree with Kinsella about that. Now, Bitcoin is different because in Bitcoin, you can copy all the code. You can copy the blocks of the time chain. Actually, you should copy it if you want to synchronize. You can copy the transaction, and you should because you have to broadcast it. You can copy everything. But the fact what we are transferring is not information. Information is proving a physical sacrifice, which was the proof of work. So in Bitcoin, we are exchanging the titularity to a physical sacrifice, the fraction of a difficulty adjustment proof of work. So the physical sacrifice of energy. So we're just transferring that. And in idea, this is not intellectual property because the data we transfer is not owned. I give you a transaction. He can also have that transaction. She can also have that transaction. The transaction is public. The code is open source, MIT license. Everybody can use it. Everybody can even change it and create a new interpretation of Bitcoin. What we don't give up is actually only the tool that we can use to write something that makes sense and that respects the rules, which is the private key. And we own the private key not because we have a license on the private key or a patent or a copyright. We own it because it's secret and we don't reveal it. So it's based on secrecy, which is not against the theory of Kinsella. Of course, I partially disagree with Kinsella probably on one thing. Kinsella says that Bitcoin emulates property because actually if you keep secret your private key, you can act as it was physical property, a bearer instrument, like a physical token you can own, and you don't need the property rights because you can emulate them. I would actually say that Bitcoin is property, unlike Stefan, because I think that Kinsella's argument against Bitcoin being property is that it's digital, it's virtual, it's a representation. But I will argue from a physical point of view, with my interest and past experience in theoretical physics, that actually there is no such a thing as a physical thing. Everything is just information anyway. Everything is basically the same as a computer program. I don't believe in physical stuff actually. I think that's made up. Of course, there are physical rules which emerge from interaction of conscious observers, but I don't think there is anything physical. Actually, nobody thinks seriously if they know some physics that solid stuff exists. It's all fields, interacting with fields, and I don't even believe in fields anymore.
Wow. Okay. I imagine the world like layers of space, that it's interrupted by different layers of space.
I actually I have a not very commonplace view. It was common at the times of Leibniz, and a few physicists may hold this view like now, like Hubism interpretation of quantum mechanics, Christopher Fuchs or David Hoffman, or the inventor of microchip, of the microchip and the touchscreen. They also agree with me as Fajim. I think that only conscious agents exist, basically people, and no physical reality. And I think that the physical laws are emergent over the interaction of many conscious agents. So I'm an idealist. It's called, not a physicalist. I don't believe in stuff. That's weird. That's not very typical.
Do you see Bitcoin as a practical tool for advancing anarcho-capitalist principles in the real world?
Yes, with some caveats. For example, the original cypherpunks, when they were talking, Tim Hay, Hughes, when they were talking about crypto-anarchism, they were taking a very defensive position. It was something like, of course, there are many differences, but the idea was, in the real world, we don't have anarchism. We basically, we are controlled by physical power of the states. But in the internet, in the cyberspace, with strong cryptography, there we can use privacy in order to be actually in a crypto anarchism. So when you walk by the street, the policeman can still shoot at you if you don't behave following the political demands. But when you're connected to the computer, assuming that the policeman will let you have a computer, which is a strong assumption. In North Korea, you cannot have general computation devices. But assuming you can, on the internet, nobody knows who you are, so they cannot hurt you physically, so you are free. So that's crypto-anarchism. So internet can emulate a stateless society. because in the internet, the state can, there is a Bitcoiner, there was a Bitcoiner, is that Mircea Popescu. It was conducted by the SEC to do some Bitcoin regulation, and he said, "Oh, sorry, I only talk with people on the Freenode IRC chat. You have to connect with an anonymous." So it didn't recognize the authority of the SEC. But the idea is that in Bitcoin, in this ideal crypto anarchist society, when you are on the internet, the normal rules of state, government, and nation state don't apply. Now the question is, can we go there? Probably yes. There is another question: can we also use Bitcoin to bring anarchism and anarcho-capitalism specifically outside of the internet into real world? Probably yes. Mostly because Bitcoin defunds the state. The state is powerful because it controls weapons and culture and money. Bitcoin cannot do anything directly about weapons, cannot do anything directly about culture, but it can do a lot about money. It basically can take out of the state two superpowers: the power of censoring transaction and prevent people from donate to WikiLeaks or the Canadian trackers, or basically international sanctions. You can take away the power to censor and the power to inflate the supply of money by paying for infinite war, infinite debt. If you take away those two superpowers, you're not left without state. You probably go back, like for example, the United States, the central federal government of the United States can only support the current budget, federal budget, because of inflation, because of the Fed printing money. If you take away the Fed, you're not getting rid of the government, but basically you bring it back to the beginning of the 20th century, which is, it's a huge step in the direction of crypto anarchism or anarcho-capitalism. Taxation, well, when the revolutionary started to war in America against the United Kingdom, the British Kingdom, they were fighting against taxes that were around 6% of the total like economy, and now we're discussing maybe 30 to 40 in the US or 70 in Italy. So it brings it back a lot, and there may be some, maybe it's wishful thinking, but it could start a virtuous spiral, like when the modern nation states were, in my opinion, a perverse negative spiral. So what happened is that this king in France, they captured Templar Knights. Well, maybe we're going a little bit too broad, but something started in France in the beginning of the 14th century, and then it became worse with the Protestant Reformation, and even worse with the French Revolution, and even worse with World War I, and even worse with the end of Bretton Woods in 1971, and possibly even worse with the Patriot Act in 2001, and with the COVID situation in 2021. Maybe it's getting worse. So we have a spiral where every time there is more state control will create problems, and now the state will present itself as a resolution to that problem, and it will amplify its power more and more. The state will capture money and use the money to print more money, with the money power to print more money to capture more stuff. Or the state will capture universities and school and newspaper, and they will use that to create a culture of statism that will reinforce the state. So maybe Bitcoin can break this kind of spiral and could maybe start a different direction spiral that can bring freedom back to the level, maybe a new decentralized order like the Middle Ages, but with antibiotics and internet, which is cooler.
How does Bitcoin support voluntarism by offering a coercion-free alternative monetary system?
And that's a very ambitious question, because there is a lot to unpack here. There is a lot of, we can go into a terminological discussion. Is that real slavery? If it's not, but even if we agree on the terms, there are a lot of interesting things. One thing is the previous discussion about implicit contracts. So if you stay here, if you do that, you are basically accepting it. So it's voluntary. It's not really coercion, because you are to some degree accepting it. But that's with that kind of line of thought, you can arrive to a very crazy idea. Like if you encounter a mugger in the street, a burglar, and he will just point a gun at you and give me your purse or you'll die. You give him the purse voluntarily. You actually do it because you don't want to die. So is that a gift and not a robbery? So if that's the case, there is no basically robbery is impossible, which is very absurd as a thought. So we have to think that the reason that this is a robbery and not a gift is that he was threatening to go against your property right in order to force you to give that up. So it was not a business proposal. It was the difference between an offer and a blackmail is that the offer is, if you do something for me, like giving me a first, I will do something for you, and both are respecting the property rights. If the blackmail or the threat is, if you give me the purse, I will not do something that aggresses your property right. So when you have against Cosa Nostra in Sicilia or 'Ndrangheta in Naples or the Yakuza in Japan or whatever, the Triads or the Mara in Honduras, and they come to you and they threaten to do something that they could not do according to property rights in exchange for something else that you are going to do, then in that case, it's coercion. So taxation, for example, is not somebody offering you, if you come into this country, then I can offer you a deal. It's somebody coming to your home built by your ancestors, where even before the state even existed, in many cases, left to you by the thread of voluntary donation. They come here and they say, by staying in your house, you are basically accepting me robbing half of your wage or your wealth. So it's not really it's not voluntary. It's basically it's slavery. A modern stating is slavery. That doesn't mean that that you cannot do anything about that. You can go away, for example, but it is practical to just go away. I did go away from Italy not to pay Italian taxes. That's fine, but I should not have been supposed to do that in order to. So it was my right to stay and not to pay. Unfortunately, in that case, the might was not aligning with the right. So the enemy violating my rights was more powerful than me. So they forced me to move here, where there is another powerful enemy, which is a little bit more gracious about asking taxes. They ask less, so I decided to stay and to pay. Now, in Bitcoin, the difference is that with Bitcoin, you have control on one small thing, which is very important. It's money. When you control on money, you can. Many people they decide to leave, not to accept some violent demand, violent threat, but they cannot leave because they don't have the money to leave. They don't have the right paperwork to leave. They cannot. Where do they go? The nation states are in control of every piece of land, so they don't know where to go in order to avoid something that they disagree. So you don't want to pay taxes because you don't believe in funding wars where children get bombed. So you don't want to fund that. Or maybe somebody's against abortion and they said, I don't want to fund abortion, or they're against something opposite to that. So where do they go? They cannot go anywhere. With Bitcoin, you basically can take all your money out of the system. You stay where you are from the physical point of view, or maybe you travel and you relocate, but the money is protected by the cypherpunk idea of moving that stuff over the internet under a cryptographic shield.
So the term financial freedom.
It's money freedom. It's just money freedom, but money. So if you think about that, money is very, very important. So every kind of interaction we have outside the circle of family and close friends, every interaction which scales up requires commerce and market, because you can do gifts in a small circle, but if you start giving to everybody, then you will remain without anything. So everything which is aside the circle where you can have the gift economy, it's market, and half of each market transaction is money. So basically, when you touch money, you are touching something which is half of every human interaction at scale, which is a lot of stuff. So Bitcoin is only money freedom, but money freedom is 99% of the path to freedom.
As Bitcoin grows in adoption, do you see any potential conflicts between maintaining libertarian principles and interacting with state-controlled institutions?
Yes, so there are at least 3 points. The first is in your premise, which is basically libertarianism is not common and statism is super common as the default. I would like to be a little bit, to give a white pill about that. To be a little bit optimistic. I think that if we really think about that, libertarianism is the default state of the world even now, in the sense that the absolute majority of actions made by human actions, action made by people, are not of violence and confiscation and prevarication and coercion. Most of the interaction, if you think about the normal day, like a random day, in a random place over the world, over the random person, which is not the general, the head of state, but the random person, they will probably wake up, go to the market, sell some good old services, get something in return, go back to their children and their family and be kind with them. Everybody has flaws, but not everybody is a criminal trying to physically aggress everybody else all the time. So most of the action that you have done today and you've done yesterday and the day before were not being directly violently aggressed or aggressive somebody. The problem is that the action that are based on coercion, they tend to have very macroscopic effect. So in that case, I would like to specify that libertarianism, in my opinion, is not and should not be a final state theory. It's not a theory about the disappearance of the evil. It's not a new world. It's not like if we reach libertarianism, evil will go away. Because if that was the case, we will have to explain why this libertarianism didn't survive in the first place. So why do we have a state? So I think that there is something inevitable, which is evil, and a subset of that is crime, and a subset of that is organized crime, and a subset of that is nation states in the modern sense, which is as a recent, very powerful type of organized crime. We can get rid of nation states, probably. I think we can actually do that, but not of organized crime, and not of crime, and not of evil for sure. What we can do is reduce it, which is not a bad thing. Like if you think about health and medicine, there is no such a thing as perfect health. No person in the history of mankind has been perfectly healthy, because otherwise they would not have died, and everybody died. So there is no perfect health. But still, there is medicine. It's not like, oh, there's no perfect health, so okay, just everybody, let's just die. No, you can still minimize disease. You can still cure some diseases and fight against diseases. It's a fight that you will eventually lose, but you can have periods and places in the world where everybody's kind of reasonably healthy, and other where like I don't know, a leper house in India where everybody's kind of too sick to tolerate. So the same is for property rights. You will never have perfect respect of property rights in a geographical area forever. That's impossible. There is always a crime, but you can actually maximize property rights. Now, I think that we are a period in which this maximization is not happening. We are in a very unhealthy period compared to the metaphor. So we can get better, and we can get back to some other periods that were actually better. Now, the question is, can Bitcoin do that? Because Bitcoin is a tool for everybody, including people that likes violence and would want to do violence. I think that specifically in some cases, no, but overall, as a net result, yes. Because Bitcoin is a tool that helps the defender against the attacker. Now, the defender is not always the good guy. For example, if you own something and I want to aggress you, you are the defender, you are the good guy. I'm the bad guy because I'm the aggressor. But now I succeed at stealing your stuff and I escape. Now you want the stuff back. Now I'm the defender and you are the aggressor, but you are the good guy and I'm the bad guy. So for example, out of the metaphor, Bitcoin, when it's stolen, the bad guys can use it to win. They can use privacy of Bitcoin to not get caught. So Bitcoin can be used for evil. For example, if I steal your Bitcoin or I send you a crypto locker as a ransomware, I get the ransom and now I go away. Bitcoin will help the bad guy in this case. But in most cases, the defender is also the original owner of the stuff, so it's the good guy. Same stuff with the governments. Bitcoin can help North Korea or Iran to avoid the sanction by the US. That doesn't make Kim Jong-un a good person, but it means that Bitcoin will have the small guy against the big guy. And overall, as a net effect, it will help Kim Jong-un against the US, but also it will help, to some degree, the North Korean person oppressed by Kim Jong-un against Kim Jong-un. So the nation states will have to make basically a balance. They will have, Iran will have to say, wait, Bitcoin helps me against the bigger guy, the United States, but it also helps my people to organize protests against me. So what is the balance? In many nation states, the balance is, for example, you think about Panama. Panama, they basically don't tax people, They don't care. They have the canal. They just take some tickets at the canal, and they survive like that. So they have such a low taxation that if they start to take, okay, Bitcoin is freeing up people from my taxation, but is also freeing up me from the inflation from the United States. That's a good deal. I think that eventually Panama will adopt the Bitcoin because it's a good deal. While China, they can say, okay, Bitcoin can help me to basically bypass sanction from the US or Russia. Bitcoin can help Russia to bypass the sanction from the US and the NATO, but they will also help Russian people to avoid expropriation and confiscation by Russia, which is something that Russia cannot tolerate. Putin had to print a shitload of rubles before attacking Ukraine because that's the way nation states survive. So every nation state will probably see Bitcoin as something that can help them against other bigger nation states, but they can have their own subjects against them. And so they have to make a balance. And in some cases, I think some nation states will actually decide to be Bitcoin friends, and some other will become natural Bitcoin enemies. And unfortunately, I think that now we see the war like NATO against maybe the BRICS or basically China and Russia. I think that that's not a stable division with Bitcoin in the world. If Bitcoin becomes important, we will have China and the United States together against Bitcoin, and somebody like Panama or Costa Verde actually in favor of Bitcoin because they have nothing to gain by controlling the population and a lot to gain by escaping control of more powerful blocks.
Tell us more of how you are decentralizing education with centralization.
Yeah, Primary Network is in a way decentralization, but also centralization, because the problem with self-sovereign knowledge and education and Bitcoin information is that decentralization is anti-fragile, it's very hard to take it over, but it's also very efficient. So for example, Bitcoin education, we noticed a while ago that everybody was reinventing Bitcoin 101. So when you have to start education, you start from scratch and you reinvent it. And it's actually very efficient to centralize to some degree, especially if you centralize if you organize in a good way something which is open source and you cannot control. Plan B Network is a company which is fostering this platform of Bitcoin learning, which is open source. So you can copy the platform and you can make it your own. So in a way, we are trying to centralize the organization a little bit in order to go to a community and tell them, you don't have to recreate Bitcoin 101. Just use the best practices that has been invented by somebody else. Or you don't have to do this course at the same time of this other course, just do it together. So we try to put stuff together, but it's not politically fragile. It cannot be taken over, because if we become the bad guys, everything we do is open source. It can just be copied by somebody else. So the open source approach will prevent us from becoming the bad guys. So we can tolerate a level of centralization more so we're trying to centralize the best practices in order to decentralize actual communities that can, so we can, by giving you the best practices, you can produce big education with a smaller, lower entry barrier of economic cost, because you don't have to reprint the book, to rewrite the book. You can just take over something that somebody else has done. So this kind of federative approach, I think, is a way to centralize to decentralize. So it's a good adventure. I think we may expand it even beyond Bitcoin education, because in a way that's something interesting, which is very similar to the homeschooling movement. Homeschooling. So you don't want the state to control education, so I will just do homeschooling for my children. That's usually homeschooling kids. They tend to perform very well. People say they will not socialize, but usually state school are a way to destroy socialization with the bullyism and other very bad phenomena. So they tend also to socialize pretty well. But now people cannot always do everything. There is division of labor. So some families will say, okay, let's get together, let's rent a room together, let's do economies of scale, and then you get bigger. And then you get so big that you need some kind of special teacher, like for speech, a specialist in mathematics, chemistry. You cannot know everything. So we call some specialists. And now you may actually want to have a shared calendar, shared expenses, and somebody to manage this organization. Basically, you reinvented the school. So from everybody get out of the capture system captured by the nation states. They reinvent the stuff from the bottom up, but now that's very inefficient because there is a lot of replication, a lot of redundancy, and now they can federate together, but on a free and voluntary level without any coercion, to make basically some kind of alliance, some kind of economies of scale by sharing resources, sharing best practices, sharing information, and rebuild basically the university system. So in a way, we're cooperating with Fiat University a bit, but we're basically rebuilding stuff from scratch. And the idea is that we can reinvent. The university was not created by the state; it was created by the free market, by free society, and it was took over by the states. Same stuff for healthcare for poor people. The state didn't invent hospitals for poor people. It was actually the Knight Orders of Malta to do that, and St. John's Order, and then the state took it over. So the idea is that we are reinventing we are recreating something like an academic system, which was not a bad idea. The problem is that it was kidnapped by the nation state. So we are trying to reinvent it outside of the nation state.
What is the best part of living in Lugano?
Lugano has a quality of life which is almost Italian, which is one of the best quality of lives in the world, but a tax system and a bureaucracy system which is almost Swiss German, which is one of the best. So it's the best of two worlds. You go to Zug, you don't eat Italian, but you have very good taxes. You go to Italy, you have very bad taxes and bureaucracy. You go to Lugano, it's in the middle. You have the best of two worlds. And now you have an epicenter of Bitcoin adoption and research. So,
what are the advantages of the Lugano Bitcoin circular economy?
Research and startup building and stuff like that is superior to Lugano. There is money. There are like Tether and Fulgur venture building stuff here in Lugano. So there is money. There are resources. There is stuff going on. There is a town council which is very, very friendly. We are part with the measure. So there's a Plan B forum. There is everybody coming here during the Plan B forum days. So there is a strong environment. Adoption as money, I think, is still a little bit in a way inferior than other places for one single reason. The Swiss people don't really need it, not badly, because they had the best fiat money in the world. It was the last fiat money to let go the gold standard, the last fiat money to basically nullify financial privacy. So in a way, they get it too good in order to understand the need for something else. So in a way, it's a very philosophical approach. It's based on curiosity over new technology, the will to do something innovative, and also it's based on idealism. Like, for example, in Lugano, Plan B Forum, there was always the Assange family. The town itself was strong advocate of freeing Julian Assange. That doesn't come from a place of need. It comes from a place of ideal. So it's more, in a way, it's less based on necessity. It's more based on openness to the idea.
What is your take on Tether's growth the past 10 years?
Well, the premise is that I don't speak for Tether, so I will say what I think. They may disagree, but I think that Tether was an incredible case of something happening out of a complex system that was not even predictable. The initial idea of the USDT of Tether was just a way to get US dollar into an exchange between Phoenix. That was just as simple as that. It's hard to have a banking system to receive fiat and a Bitcoin trading system in the same place, because they will close your bank account. So the brilliant idea of Tether initially was, let's just split these two things. On one side you have Bitcoin trading, on the other you have just a representation of the US dollars to bypass bank accounts. That was the basic idea, was a good intuition. The second very good intuition was, instead of doing your stuff only for your exchange, since other exchanges will have the same problem, just open it up as a shared protocol. So basically it was an idea, instead of trying to be competitive and to retain an advantage to have the kind of bridge and everybody will rebuild the bridge, just let everybody use your bridge. And then there was not actually an idea, but a problem. When a lot of people are using your dollar credit, where do you put your dollars? Because no bank is big enough to keep your 4 billion cash in a basement. So you actually have to de-risk it and to be very conservative about reinvesting this credit. And Tether became something that existed a long time ago and doesn't exist anymore, which is a full reserve bank. a bank that instead of taking your money and doing fractional reserve and spending it around, it just keeps your money. Of course, not as cash because it's too big, but as very conservative one-to-one investment. So that was something incredible. That the first full reserve bank in a very long time. And then something happened. Some of that investment happened to be U.S. Treasury in the moment where the U.S. Treasury started to increase interest rates. So it became a wonderful occasion to basically make a lot of money. Tether became, I think, is the most profitable company per employee in the history of mankind, which is something. Now, Tether is another phase. Is basically in the phase of realizing that this wealth that has been created by the use case can be used in order to foster Bitcoin infrastructure. So they're sponsoring the Lugar Initiative, they're sponsoring the Plan B network, they're sponsoring AI research, decentralized AI research in contraposition with the centralized alternative, biotech, hopefully decentralized biotech instead of like Google central control. So they're basically taking this advantage in order, instead of just thinking that it will last forever, they are trying to reuse it, recycle it into building decentralized infrastructure for the future. They are doing like hole punch, local AI, a lot of stuff. And I think it's a very smart move because the USDT operation itself will not last forever as it does today. The interest rates will go down again. The dollar, which is represented by USDT, intrinsically it's a potentially hyperinflationary currency. It's a fiat, and dollar will hyperinflate eventually. So I think that they are very forward thinking into taking this advantage and spreading it into a lot of Bitcoin initiative. Of course, the Tether lawyer may deny or not confirm what I'm saying, but I think it's a very good strategy.